Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about the Crusades and some of the skeleton DNA that they found regarding some of the Crusader soldiers. And they were able to extract some DNA from them, and that in and of itself is interesting because the way the bodies were, I guess, stored or preserved was in this mass grave in a pit. In the area of Lebanon, it's pretty humid, or it can get humid, and usually that is not good for DNA's lifespan. It tends to get denatured and it becomes undateable. But in this case, they were able to do that, and some of the results are pretty interesting. This reads, this is from CNN. DNA from 13th century remains buried in a pit in Lebanon is shedding light on the lives of Crusader soldiers and how they mix with the local population. So they were mixing with the local population to some degree. And again, this shows the power of religion and ideology, and that it does change. Something abstract as an idea could change the face of the earth in the physical sense. So if you guys don't know about the Crusades, here's just a pretty good just a graphic and a visual of it. So the Crusades were roughly between 1096 and 1204. There are four of them. To some degree, they did accomplish what they set out because they established kingdoms. The Crusaders established kingdoms, but a lot of people died, and it became a huge event that is still talked about to this day. People still want reparations for it to this day. And what we're focusing on here is this area, which is modern day Lebanon. And you can see in the Second Crusade, the Crusaders did go through this place called Sidon in Lebanon. You've probably heard of it. Interesting enough, a lot of the burials here, they haven't found many, although they have found two prominent mass graves that have been studied in the past. For the most part, a lot of what remain, like the remains and whatever the Crusaders left behind, a lot of them are gone, and the men lost to history. So one of the things Chris Tyler Smith, rather, he was one of the genetics researchers involved. He says that Richard the Lionheart was, who was one of the famous Crusaders. He went to fight in the Crusades, but we don't know much about the ordinary soldiers who lived and died there. And then they find these ancient samples, and then they get some insights. So just a little bit of details. They uncovered 25 male skeletons in two burial pits in Sidon, Lebanon, dating to about 1200s. This is one of the few known Crusader burial sites where major battles raged between 1110 and 1249. Between 1110 and 1249, that is during pretty much from the Second Crusade onward, is when they went through. Because if you look at the First Crusade, one group went straight to Jerusalem through the Mediterranean, and then the other two groups left at the same time, and then they joined forces, and then they went to through Constantinople to Antioch and then to Edessa. So they didn't go through, in the First Crusade, they didn't go through that part of Lebanon. And here's a cool picture of right here. So this is the bones of the Crusaders in this mass grave here. You can see it's just brutal. They did find a lot of evidence that they died in a violent way, based on evidence of blunt force injuries on their skulls, on their bones. Bodies were dumped in the pit and burned. Carbon-14 dating allowed the researchers to determine that the European shoe buckles and a coin found alongside the remains dated back to the Crusades. So that's some of the stuff that they found, some of the remnants they had of the Crusaders, which matches up with the time period. Also the style and what the buckles and stuff were made out of. A detached skull was also found nearby. They believe that it was catapulted into an opposing camp as a way to spread disease and decrease morale, and that was a known strategy too at the time. Because this is right around the time of the Mongols as well. Or the Mongols were, I think the Mongols, were a little bit around this time. Actually, maybe it might have been either right after or, I think it was right after this. And they had those types of tactics as well. They were able to recover DNA from the temporal bones and perform whole genome sequencing to confirm that the men were Crusaders. So here are some of the origins. Let's just get into the nitty-gritty here. Some were from Spain and Sardinia. 4 were locals who were probably recruited to fight, and 2 carried mixed genetics, indicating that they were the result of relations between Crusaders and locals. So if we look at the map again, I mean, they were here for over 100 years. So that does make sense that some of the early Crusaders might have, after the first Crusade, they set up shop, so to speak, and then perhaps, or definitely, they had some offspring with just the locals there. And remember, they were spreading the word, not only fighting a holy war, they were spreading the word of their religion. So naturally, they were able to convert some of the people, the locals there. And the fact that there were multi-generational Crusaders fighting on behalf of their religion, it does make sense that there were some mixed genetic younger Crusaders who were fighting, as well as these locals who were just recruited to fight. So it's very interesting how you can see all that's borne out through the DNA. Some of the soldiers who traveled from Western Europe to fight stayed in the newly established Christian states that popped up along the eastern Mediterranean coast. So yeah, like right here, these are some of the new, or at the time, they were the newly founded Christian states. So again, it was marginally successful in that they did set up shop for a while, for a couple of generations or so. So they settled down and had families with locals. As the war raged on, they also died together in battle. So this is really interesting. So there's genetic diversity in the Near East during these times, and these mixed individuals. But after a while, the genetic influence of the Crusaders didn't leave a lasting mark on Lebanon, and that's because, before that, when they talk about the genetic influence, like this lasting mark, think about the Mongols, think about the Spaniards that went to South America. Both of those events, they altered the genetic makeup of the local population forever. And part of that might be, in the case of South America, might be because of smallpox and all of these basically near extinction events of the indigenous population there, brought by the Spaniards. So that is one big, also including the genocide that they committed and killing all those people as well. Same thing with the Mongols. They if you didn't join them, they would kill you, and they killed countless amounts of people. So the Crusaders, in contrast, it seems like they did leave a mark in terms of ideology in the area, but after the Crusades were over, the people who mixed with the Crusaders, if they hadn't died already, then they went back into the local population and mixed back in with the locals. And after a few generations, those traces of the previous genetic mark of the Crusaders was just diluted. They call that genetic cul-de-sac, I think, or that effect anyway. So the researchers sequenced the DNA of the people who lived in that area during the Roman period 2,000 years ago. So they did this other study. They wanted to see the extent of this genetic continuity in Italy. So what they did was they took the DNA of people living in Rome, or during the Roman period rather, 2,000 years ago, and they found that it's very, very similar to the people who are living there today. So they had this pretty much undisturbed line of genetics of that are very similar to the Romans, to the people living there 2,000 years ago. So Haber, he says, you look at the genetics of people who lived during the Roman period and the genetics of people who are living there today, you would think that there was just this continuity. You would think nothing happened between the Roman period and today. You would miss that for a certain period of time, the population of Lebanon included Europeans and people with mixed ancestry. So what he's getting at is the DNA evidence really does shed a lot of light on the nuances of history and these pockets of interesting events that happen throughout history, and you would miss it if you weren't studying, if you were just studying everything as a whole. So for what I'm trying to say is that this Roman period, when comparing the people who were living 2,000 years ago to the people now, you would never guess that there were people who mixed with the people in the Near East, because that came and went within that 2,000 year gap that you wouldn't notice. So it's very important to take DNA evidence at whichever point in history, because you never know who was mixing with who for what amount of time. And remember, this is only with like 100, 150 years that they had a presence there. And then they became just a distant memory after just a few centuries after that. After the fighting finished, the mixed generation married into the local population, and the genetic traces of Crusaders were lost. And it's important to know that that's possible. The study provides insight about the kind of things that often aren't included in recorded history. And of course, everyone knows that history is written by the victors. History is very biased. Even written accounts are biased of very famous historians. Things get embellished. But DNA and genetics, they're hard evidence, but also you have to understand what you're dealing with, and you have to understand the vulnerabilities as well. Genetics gives us a complementary approach that can confirm some things that we read about in history and tell us things that are not recorded in the historical records that we have. So again, this article is very interesting, not just because of the finding out the origins of the Crusaders and their ethnic background and all that. It's also a good reminder of the shortcomings and the advantages of genetics, and so moving forward, when you're reading articles about DNA and when DNA evidence is presented, or a sequencing of genomes, anything like that, it's important to know the time periods, the ranges, and some of the historical context that goes along with it as well. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this, about the Crusades, about genetic evidence, about testing, radiocarbon dating and thorium dating, any of that stuff. I'm going to do an episode regarding the uranium thorium dating as well. It's very interesting. It's more reliable for dating stuff further back beyond 45,000 years. Basically, where radiocarbon dating starts to fall off, uranium thorium dating kind of picks up and is much more accurate. So we'll be talking about that too. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you guys later.